Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When rancher Jason Crawford receives a mysterious letter demanding $137,000 in HOA fees or face losing his family land, he uncovers a chilling scheme to steal everything he owns. With bulldozers at his doorstep, Jason must fight back before it's too late. I woke up just as the sun was climbing over the hills, painting the sky with soft streaks of pink and gold. The air smelled fresh, a mix of hay, earth, and that faint scent of morning dew that always made me feel grounded. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. I pulled on my work boots, grabbed a mug of coffee, and stepped outside onto the porch, looking out over the rolling fields of my ranch. The cattle were already grazing near the fence line, and in the distance, my horses stirred lazily in the corral. It was peaceful, the kind of peace only a wide-open 400-acre ranch could give you. My land, my inheritance, my life. The sound of an engine broke the quiet as the mail truck bumped its way up the long dirt driveway. I raised a hand in greeting as the mailman handed me a small stack of envelopes. "Morning, Jason," he called. "Looks like official business today." I sifted through the usual bills, a catalog or two, until my eyes landed on a thick, cream-colored envelope stamped with bold red letters. Ridgeview Estates HOA. Urgent notification. My brow furrowed. HOA. That didn't make sense. I wasn't part of any homeowners association. The nearest subdivision was miles away, and my ranch predated all that development by decades. I tore the envelope open right there on the porch. Inside was a letter printed in official-looking font, topped with a gaudy gold logo of a stylized ridge. My eyes scanned the words, and each line made my stomach drop lower and lower. "Dear Mr. Crawford," it began. "According to our records, you have an outstanding balance of $137,000 in unpaid HOA dues accumulated over the past 5 years. Failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in foreclosure proceedings in accordance with Ridgeview Estates HOA bylaws. We reserve the right to reclaim and manage the property until such debts are satisfied." I stood frozen, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. $137,000. Foreclosure. What the hell was this? My ranch wasn't part of Ridgeview Estates. It wasn't part of anything. I hadn't signed a single paper tying me to an HOA. My grandfather had owned this land since the 60s, and when he passed, it had gone straight to me, free and clear, no strings attached. I flipped the letter over, looking for an explanation, but all I found was a phone number listed under Legal Affairs. Without thinking, I pulled out my cell and dialed. It rang 3 times before a clipped, automated voice answered. "You have reached Ridgeview Estates Homeowners Association Legal Department. If you are calling regarding an outstanding balance, press 1. I jabbed the number. A woman's voice picked up, cool and detached. "Legal Affairs, how can I help you?" "Yes, ma'am. My name is Jason Crawford. I just received a letter saying I owe your HOA over $100,000. This has to be some kind of mistake. I don't belong to your association." There was a pause. I could hear her typing on a keyboard. "Mr. Crawford, let me check." More typing. Then, "Our records show that Parcel 401 Ridgeview Estates Expansion is under your name and is part of our jurisdiction. The dues have been accruing since 2018. "Expansion?" I felt my chest tighten. No. My property isn't in Ridgeview Estates. I've lived here my whole life. I have the deed. This is my ranch. My grandfather bought it 50 years ago. "I understand you're concerned," the woman replied, her tone not budging an inch. "If you have documentation, you may submit a dispute in writing. Otherwise, the dues remain due. Anything else?" I clenched my jaw. "Yeah, there's something else. Who do I talk to about this? I want answers now." "You'll need to direct any disputes to the legal department. Submit in writing, sir." The line went dead before I could press further. I stood there on the porch, staring out at the fields that had been mine for as long as I could remember, the weight of that letter pressing down like a stone in my gut. I didn't know what was going on, but one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be solved with a phone call. The next morning, after a night spent tossing and turning, I climbed into my old pickup and headed straight for Ridgeview Estates. I wasn't going to let some letter scare me off my own land. If they thought I was just going to roll over, they didn't know me very well. The drive took me past the edge of their development, rows of cookie-cutter houses with manicured lawns, all lined up like plastic toys. It was a far cry from the open fields and rugged fences of my ranch. I pulled into the HOA office, a shiny building that looked like it had been designed by someone who loved glass and hated shade. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of fake lemon. A receptionist sat behind a massive marble desk, tapping away at her computer without looking up. "Can I help you?" she asked flatly. "Yeah," I said, stepping closer. "Jason Crawford. I got a letter saying I owe your HOA over $100 grand. There's been a mistake. I need to speak with whoever's in charge." She finally glanced up, raising a penciled eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. But I'm not leaving until I talk to someone." With a sigh, she pressed a button on her phone. "Karen, there's a Mr. Crawford here. Says it's urgent." She listened for a second, then hung up. "She'll see you. Down the hall, last door on the right." I made my way down the sleek hallway, my boots echoing on the polished floor. I knocked once before pushing open the door. Inside sat a woman behind a large desk, her blonde bob perfectly in place, a tailored suit hugging her sharp frame. She looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Crawford," she said smoothly. "I'm Karen Hargraves, president of Ridgeview Estates HOA. Please have a seat." I stayed standing. "I didn't come here to chat, Ms. Hargraves. I came here because you sent me this." I slapped the letter down on her desk. "And I don't owe you a damn dime." Karen leaned back, folding her hands. "I understand this must be confusing for you, but according to our records, your property was incorporated into Ridgeview Estates during our expansion 8 years ago." I frowned. "That's impossible. My land's been in my family since the 60s. We've never been part of any HOA. She swiveled her monitor toward me and pulled up a map. "Here," she said, pointing. "Your parcel 401. Right here. See? Within our boundaries. Our expansion was approved by the county. You became part of Ridgeview Estates automatically." I stepped closer, studying the screen. The map showed a thick red boundary line, and sure enough, my land, my entire ranch, was inside it. My stomach turned. "This map's wrong," I said firmly. "My deed says otherwise." Karen's smile tightened. "Well, I suppose that's something the courts will decide. In the meantime, the dues are owed, and the foreclosure process will proceed if they're not paid." I clenched my fists. "I never agreed to be in your HOA. I never signed a thing." She shrugged, rising from her chair. "You don't have to sign anything. It was part of the expansion plan. Standard procedure." "Standard? You're trying to steal my land," I shot back. Her gaze sharpened. "Mr. Crawford, I suggest you seek legal counsel if you plan to challenge this. Otherwise, I recommend settling your account before it's too late." I stared at her, feeling a mix of rage and disbelief. "This isn't over." "I didn't think it was," she replied smoothly, already turning back to her computer. I left the office, my boots heavy on the tile. As I walked back to my truck, I heard her voice faintly from inside, speaking into the phone. "Go ahead with the next step." The words chilled me more than the cold air outside. Whatever game they were playing, it was moving fast. And I knew I was going to have to fight harder than I ever had. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made me sit up, listening for something, though I didn't know what. By dawn, I was dressed and out the door, half expecting things to be the same, hoping yesterday had been some twisted nightmare. But as soon as I reached the end of my driveway, my heart sank. A giant banner stretched across my front gate in bold, arrogant letters. "Property foreclosed by Ridgeview Estates HOA." Below it, a massive chain wound around the gate, secured by a thick padlock. And standing just beyond the fence were two men in black uniforms, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding their eyes. They weren't local cops. They weren't county deputies. They were private security, hired muscle with HOA patches sewn onto their sleeves. One of them stepped forward as I approached. "State your business," he barked. I stared at him stunned. "This is my ranch. I live here. You're on my property." He didn't flinch. "According to Ridgeview Estates HOA records, this property has been foreclosed due to unpaid dues. You're trespassing. Leave now or we'll notify law enforcement." A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "Notify them." "Hell, I'll save you the trouble." I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. My hand shook, not from fear, but from pure, boiling fury. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, dust trailing behind his SUV as it rumbled down the dirt road. It was Sheriff Lewis, a man I'd known for years. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, his face caught between sympathy and helplessness. "Morning, Jason," he greeted, eyeing the locked gate and the guards. "What's going on here?" I held up the letter. "They claim they foreclosed on me. Put up this sign, hired guards. Locked me out of my own damn land." Lewis sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I've Heard things about Ridgeview's legal team pulling stunts like this. But Jason, they've got papers. I can't just throw them off without a court order. You're telling me I'm locked out of my home because of fake papers? I'm telling you it's a civil matter. Until a judge says otherwise, my hands are tied. He lowered his voice. You need a lawyer. Fast. I felt the weight of his words settle like a stone in my chest. And what am I supposed to do in the meantime? Sleep in my truck. Lewis shook his head sadly. I'm sorry, buddy. As he left, the guards smirked from behind the fence. One of them leaned on the gate. Looks like you're out of luck, cowboy. I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to respond. Not now. Not here. But it wasn't just the gate. As I walked along the fence line, trying to see what else they'd done, my stomach twisted tighter. From a distance, I watched trucks unloading construction materials near the old barn. Workers were hammering stakes into the ground. My grandfather's hand-built corral was already gone, flattened into a pile of splintered wood. And the cows, gone, driven out of the pasture, herded toward a makeshift pen outside the boundary. I watched as a man spray-painted a sign, future site of Ridgeview Villas. My throat burned with rage. They weren't just taking my land, they were erasing it. And as the sun set over the hills that had always been mine, I realized something. They thought this was over, but they hadn't seen me fight yet. The next morning, I sat in my truck, staring at the locked gate that now separated me from my own land. I'd parked on the roadside, watching the hired guards patrol like they were protecting a fortress. My fists tightened around the steering wheel. I couldn't let this stand. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the contacts until I found the number I needed. Patrick Reed. Patrick wasn't just any lawyer, he was a bulldog in a suit, the kind of man who thrived on ugly fights and complicated property disputes. We'd crossed paths once years ago when I needed advice on a zoning issue. Now I needed him more than ever. He picked up on the second ring. Jason Crawford, haven't heard from you in a while. Patrick, I said, my voice low, I've got a hell of a situation. Ridgeview Estates HOA claims they own my land. They locked me out, put up guards, started tearing down my buildings. I need help. A pause. Then a dry chuckle. Sounds like you've got yourself a full-blown HOA siege. Meet me at my office in an hour. Bring every document you've got. I didn't waste a second. I drove straight into town, heart pounding harder the closer I got. Patrick's office was a small brick building tucked between a diner and a hardware store, but inside it felt like a war room. Maps lined the walls, bookshelves groaned under thick legal volumes, and a whiteboard bore scribbles from a dozen active cases. Patrick stood behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, sipping coffee like it was fuel. He motioned me in. Show me. I laid out my deed, the original property map from the 60s, the inheritance papers, every scrap of paper I had proving ownership. He examined each one carefully, his sharp eyes narrowing. Everything here looks airtight, he muttered. No mention of HOA jurisdiction, no easements, no annexation clauses. Then how the hell can they claim my ranch? I demanded. Patrick leaned back in his chair. They're banking on intimidation and confusion. I've seen it before. These HOAs push expansions quietly, fudge lines on maps, hope no one notices until it's too late. I frowned. So they faked a map? Likely, he nodded. We'll need proof. And for that, we bring in a surveyor. By afternoon, I was standing alongside Patrick and a man named Carlos Hernandez, a licensed surveyor with decades of experience. Carlos set up his tripod along my property line, his equipment whirring and beeping as he took measurements. Every few minutes, he frowned deeper. This doesn't match, he said finally. According to county records, your property boundary is here. He pointed to a flagged stake. But Ridgeview's map shows it pushed a full 200 feet inward. They moved the line, on paper. Patrick grinned darkly. There's our smoking gun. Carlos printed his findings, signing off the measurements. You've got solid evidence. Their claim's a sham. Relief mingled with anger in my chest. We can stop them? Patrick's gaze hardened. We can fight them, but they'll fight back. This won't be clean. As we packed up, I looked back at the ranch, at the guards still pacing along fences that didn't belong to them, at the construction crews planting flags deeper into my land. I wasn't naive. This wasn't over, but now I had ammunition, and they had no idea what was coming. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I really did, but nothing prepared me for what I found that morning. I'd gone into town early to drop off the surveyor's report with Patrick. We'd agreed to file a preliminary injunction first thing Monday. I was feeling hopeful. Finally, I had proof. Something real to stand on. But as I drove back down the dusty road toward my ranch, my stomach sank before I even pulled into view. I could see the machinery from a mile away. The glint of metal, the churn of engines, clouds of dust rising like a signal fire. I slammed the brakes as soon as I saw where the bulldozers were digging, right in the middle of the north pasture, tearing into the soft earth, the family plot. My grandfather, my grandmother, my uncle, all buried there, under an old oak tree we'd always called the Sentinel. And now that tree was gone. Nothing but a stump and a pile of shattered roots. I jumped out of the truck and sprinted toward the site, my boots pounding against the ground. "Hey!" I roared. "Stop! Stop that damn machine!" The bulldozer hesitated, its driver looking down at me through dark sunglasses. But then a man in a neon vest, probably the site foreman, waved him forward. "Keep going," he shouted. "We're on schedule." I felt something snap inside me. I ran back to the truck, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. The old John Deere tractor sat parked beside the barn, keys still in the ignition. Without thinking, I jumped over to it, fired it up, and pointed it straight at the temporary fence they'd erected along the eastern boundary. The guards saw me coming. One of them yelled, "Hey, stop!" But I didn't stop. The tractor's front bucket crashed through the fence like it was made of twigs, splintering posts, snapping wire. I drove straight onto the site, the engine roaring beneath me. The workers scattered, shouting, dropping tools as I plowed across the dirt toward the bulldozer. I swung the bucket low, slammed it into the bulldozer's blade with a deafening clang, and killed the tractor's engine. "Turn it off!" I barked at the operator. "Now!" The bulldozer hissed to a stop. Dust settled around us. Silence fell. Then came the pounding of boots as the guards closed in. One grabbed my arm roughly. "You're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of property." "I'm not trespassing," I shot back. "This is my land." "According to Ridgeview, it's not," he sneered. Before I could answer, the sound of sirens cut through the air. I looked up to see two sheriff's cruisers barreling down the road, lights flashing. Sheriff Lewis climbed out first, hand on his holster, eyes wide as he took in the scene. "What the hell's going on here?" he demanded. "They're digging up my family cemetery," I said hoarsely. "They tore out the tree. They're ripping into the graves." Lewis paled, his gaze flicking from the wrecked fence to the open pit. "You got proof of ownership?" I pulled the folded deed from my back pocket, still crumpled from the night before. "Right here, and the surveyor's report is with Patrick. We can get it." Lewis cursed under his breath. He turned to the guards. "Everybody stand down. Nobody moves another piece of dirt. This site's shut down until I see paperwork. You hear me?" The guards hesitated. The foreman stepped forward, protesting, but Lewis cut him off sharply. "Not another inch. Get your lawyers if you want to argue." I felt my knees go weak, relief washing through me in waves. But beneath it, the anger simmered hotter than ever. They'd crossed a line today. They hadn't just tried to take my land. They'd tried to erase my family. And that was something I'd never forgive. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and paperwork. Patrick's office became my second home, a fortress stacked with files, maps, and coffee cups that never seemed to empty. He worked like a man possessed, firing off emails, flipping through case law, slamming sticky notes onto documents with scribbled reminders. Every hour brought a new discovery, and every discovery dug the hole deeper for Ridgeview Estates. By Monday morning, Patrick had compiled a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. Inside was everything: my original deed, the county's recorded maps, the surveyor's signed report, aerial photos from a local drone hobbyist showing the true fence lines, even witness statements from neighbors who'd lived here long enough to remember, when Ridgeview didn't even exist. "They've got nothing," Patrick said, flipping through the binder one last time. "Their map, fabricated, their annexation documents, never filed with the county, their foreclosure paperwork, built on a false claim of jurisdiction. This isn't just a land dispute, Jason. This is fraud." Hearing it laid out so clearly should have made me feel triumphant, but all I felt was exhaustion, a bone-deep weariness I couldn't shake. "Can we stop them?" Patrick leaned forward. "We're filing an injunction today. By noon, I'll have a judge sign an emergency order halting all construction and preventing any further action by Ridgeview on your property." "And after that?" He smiled grimly. "And then we go for the throat." By midday, we stood in the county courthouse watching the clerk stamp the injunction papers. It felt surreal, so official yet so fragile, a piece of paper standing between me and a corporation willing to bulldoze graves. Patrick handed me a copy. Sheriff Lewis will serve them this afternoon. They're legally bound to stop. True to his word, by 4 o'clock, I watched from the road as Lewis pulled up to the construction site, flanked by 2 deputies. I couldn't hear their conversation from where I stood, but the body language said enough. The foreman's defensive arm waves, the guard's stiff shoulders, Lewis's pointed finger jabbing toward the bulldozers. Within an hour, the crews packed up their tools and drove off, leaving the land quiet again. Quiet, but wounded. Patrick wasn't done. That evening, back in his office, he laid out the next step. We're filing a lawsuit for trespassing, destruction of property, emotional distress, and fraudulent claims. And we're naming Karen Hargraves personally, along with Ridgeview Estates HOA. She's the one behind this, I muttered. Patrick nodded. We can prove it. The signature authorizing that fake map, hers. The expansion approval letter, her name. The chain of emails pushing this foreclosure, every one of them CC'd to her inbox. I felt a flicker of satisfaction. For weeks, it had felt like I was screaming into the void. Now finally, I wasn't just reacting, I was fighting back. And I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, neighbors started reaching out. People from nearby properties, even residents inside Ridgeview Estates, emailed Patrick with their own complaints. Fines for trivial things, mysterious adjustments to property lines, threats of liens over made-up violations. She's been doing this for years, Patrick said. You're just the first one stubborn enough to push back. Their stories piled up, a mountain of evidence against Karen and her cronies. Patrick added them to the case as witnesses. The more we uncovered, the uglier it looked. This wasn't a rogue policy or an honest mistake. This was a pattern, and it was about to blow wide open. The courtroom was packed the morning of the trial. I'd never seen so many people crammed into those old wooden benches. Some were reporters scribbling into notepads. Others were neighbors, farmers, and even a few Ridgeview residents who'd come to see the showdown. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, like everyone knew something big was about to break. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Patrick, feeling both exhausted and wired, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks. Across from us sat Karen Hargraves, dressed in a pristine white blazer, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't look at me. She just whispered to her attorney, who looked equally smug. The judge entered, banging the gavel. Let's proceed. Patrick rose first. Your Honor, this case isn't just about a boundary dispute. It's about fraud, trespass, destruction of property, and a coordinated effort to steal land through forged documents and illegal annexation. He laid out the evidence methodically. The original deed, the official county map, the surveyor's certified report. He called Carlos Hernandez to the stand, who walked the court through every measurement, every false line Ridgeview had drawn to encroach on my land. Karen's lawyer objected, argued, tried to muddy the waters, but every time Patrick countered with clear documentation, signed affidavits, time-stamped emails. Piece by piece, the false narrative unraveled. Then came the emails. Patrick projected them onto a screen, each more damning than the last. Karen instructing her team to adjust the parcel maps to bring Crawford's acreage inside the boundary, her approving the fake foreclosure notice, her pushing for quick enforcement before he lawyers up. Karen's face paled as the courtroom murmured around her. She knew exactly what she was doing. Patrick said, his voice cutting through the noise. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a calculated scheme to take what wasn't hers. When Karen took the stand, she tried to spin it, claimed she was following board recommendations, claimed it was common practice. But under cross-examination, Patrick shredded her excuses, pointing out the signatures, the emails, the authority she'd wielded over every step. By the time she stepped down, her confident facade had cracked. The judge leaned forward. I've heard enough. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Jason Crawford. The actions of Ridgeview Estates HOA, under the direction of Karen Hargraves, were fraudulent and unlawful. All Ridgeview claims to Mr. Crawford's land are hereby void. Any structures built as a result of this fraud must be removed at Ridgeview's expense. He paused, then added, furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit property theft. A gasp rippled through the room. Karen sat frozen, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. The judge's gaze locked on her. "Ms. Hargraves, you are hereby remanded into custody pending investigation." The bailiff stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in the courtroom light. I watched as Karen was led away, her eyes wide, her lips parted in disbelief. For a moment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, swallowed by the consequences of her own ambition. Patrick clapped me on the shoulder. "It's over, Jason." I felt a weight lift off my chest. Not just relief, but justice. And for the first time in weeks, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It had been 6 months since the trial, but every time I walked the land, it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. The fences were rebuilt, stronger than before, stretching solid and straight along the true boundary lines. The old barn had been repaired, its roof gleaming under the midday sun. The family plot, once scarred by bulldozers, had been restored with care. A new oak tree stood planted at its center, roots taking hold in the same soil that had held generations of my family. And at the entrance to the ranch, mounted proudly on a new wooden archway, hung a sign I'd carved myself. "Private property, no trespassing, not part of any HOA." It was more than a warning. It was a declaration. Patrick had helped me secure a settlement after the trial. Ridgeview Estates had been ordered to pay damages for trespass, destruction, and emotional distress, enough to cover the repairs and then some. Karen's case had made headlines across the county. HOA president indicted for fraud, the papers read. Her mugshot had been splashed across local news. From what I'd heard, she'd accepted a plea deal, avoiding a long trial in exchange for stepping down and paying restitution. But the HOA wasn't the same. After the scandal, half the board resigned. The neighborhood meetings turned into shouting matches. By the time the dust settled, Ridgeview was a hollow shell of what it had been. But none of that mattered to me anymore. My fight was over. This evening, I stood on the porch, a cold beer in hand, watching as the last light of day bathed the fields in gold. Across the pasture, the cattle grazed peacefully, tails flicking lazily. Near the barn, my niece and nephew chased each other with sticks, their laughter echoing through the air. My sister leaned against the railing beside me, sipping sweet tea, her eyes reflecting the same quiet satisfaction I felt in my bones. "You really did it," she said softly. I nodded, smiling. We did it. Behind us, music drifted from a speaker, old country tunes, familiar and warm. Friends and neighbors had gathered under the string lights I'd hung from the barn to the big oak tree. There was barbecue on the grill, cornbread on the table, and cold drinks clinking in mason jars. Even Sheriff Lewis had stopped by, trading his badge for a pair of jeans and a smile. "I never thought I'd see this place whole again," my sister murmured. I looked out at the land, at the life returning to every acre. "Neither did I admitted. "But maybe it was never broken, just waiting for me to fight for it." She nudged me playfully. "Well, remind me never to get on your bad side." I laughed, raising my bottle in a quiet toast. To family, to home, and to never letting anyone take what's yours. As the night deepened, the stars blinked awake above us, scattered like a million promises across the sky. I sat back in my old rocking chair, listening to the hum of conversation, the crackle of the fire pit, the gentle rustle of wind through the grass, and for the first time in a long time I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking ahead.